People like you don't belong here, the voice said, low and certain, like it had been said 1,000 times before, and the street seemed to hold its breath around it, the hum of distant traffic fading into something thin and far away as Marcus Reed slowly lifted his eyes, not in defiance, not in fear, but with a quiet steadiness that didn't match the tension tightening the air. The flickering streetlight above cast a pale amber glow across cracked pavement still damp from an earlier drizzle. Each reflection stretching like a broken mirror beneath worn sneakers and polished boots, and Marcus stood there in the middle of it all, shoulders squared but relaxed, his work jacket still dusted with the faint chalky residue of drywall from a job he'd just finished 2 miles down the road, his hands rough, steady, the kind that fixed things, not the kind that caused trouble, yet trouble had found him anyway. The way it always seemed to when silence was mistaken for weakness, across from him. Ethan Cole tilted his head slightly, studying Marcus like he was trying to figure out why this man hadn't already backed down, hadn't already looked away, hadn't already played the role everyone expected him to play, and behind Ethan, a few figures lingered in loose formation, their shadows stretching long across the wet asphalt, their presence less about numbers and more about pressure, the kind you felt before you even understood it. The kind that made most people step aside without a word. A car rolled past at the end of the block, its headlights sweeping briefly across Marcus's face, catching the calm in his expression, the kind of calm that didn't come from ignorance but from choice, a decision made long before this moment, long before this street, long before these voices, and as the light moved on, the world seemed to dim again, settling back into that uneasy stillness. Marcus didn't speak right away, didn't rush to fill the silence. Because he knew silence had weight, and sometimes it said more than anything else ever could, his breath slow and even, visible in the cool night air, his eyes flicking briefly past Ethan toward the sidewalk behind him where a young boy stood. Frozen near a chain-link fence, clutching the strap of a worn backpack like it was the only thing keeping him grounded, and for a fraction of a second, something shifted in Marcus's gaze, something protective, something older than fear. Ethan noticed it too. The subtle turn, the almost invisible choice, and a faint smirk touched the corner of his mouth as if he had just confirmed something he already believed, that this man, this quiet, unassuming figure in a faded jacket, was exactly what he appeared to be, nothing more, nothing worth reconsidering, and yet the air didn't move, the street didn't breathe again, and Marcus didn't step back. Instead, he adjusted his stance just slightly, enough to place himself between the boy and the voices behind him, a small movement, almost unnoticeable, but deliberate, and in that moment, under that flickering light, with the city holding its distance and the night pressing in close, Marcus Reed made a choice that no one there fully understood. Yet, a choice that would change the direction of everything that followed, though right now, all anyone could see was a man who refused to disappear. Marcus Reed had learned a long time ago that most people decided who you were before you ever spoke, before you ever had the chance to explain anything. And on nights like this, under lights that flickered more than they shined, that truth felt even heavier, like the air itself carried it, pressing it quietly against his shoulders. Earlier that evening he had been kneeling on a narrow kitchen floor across town, tightening a loose wire behind an aging outlet while an elderly woman stood nearby. Wringing her hands, worried about sparks, worried about cost, worried about things breaking that she could not afford to fix, and Marcus had worked carefully, methodically, explaining each step in a calm voice, not because she asked, but because he knew what it felt like to not understand what was happening in your own space, and when the light finally came on steady and warm, she had smiled with relief that softened the lines on her face, pressing a folded bill into his hand that he almost refused until she insisted, telling him that kindness should be paid forward even when money was tight. That was the kind of man Marcus was, the kind who left places quieter than he found them, who measured his days not in miles or dollars but in small moments where something worked again, where someone felt just a little less alone, and yet none of that followed him onto this street, none of that seemed to matter beneath the hum of tension now building around him. His jacket still held the faint scent of dust and insulation, his boots marked by a day of honest work, but to the eyes watching him now, he was reduced to something simpler, something easier to dismiss, and Marcus knew that look, knew it the same way he knew the rhythm of a loose connection or the warning buzz of a failing circuit. He shifted his weight slightly, not to retreat, not to advance, but to settle into the moment with a quiet control that came from years of choosing when to speak and when to remain still, his gaze steady, his breathing even, as if the world around him could not rush him into becoming someone he was not. Behind him, the boy near the fence had not moved, his small frame rigid, eyes wide in a way that reminded Marcus of a reflection he had seen once in a window years ago, a younger version of himself standing in a place where voices got louder and space felt smaller, and for a brief second, the memory flickered across his mind like the streetlight above, quick but sharp, enough to anchor his choice. Marcus had grown up on blocks not so different from this one, where silence was often mistaken for surrender and calm was misunderstood as weakness, but he had also learned something else, something quieter, something harder to see, that strength did not always announce itself, that sometimes it stood still when everything else demanded movement, and that sometimes it chose to stay when leaving would have been easier. Ethan Cole shifted again, impatience threading through his posture now, as if waiting for a reaction that never came was beginning to feel like a challenge, his eyes narrowing slightly, trying to read Marcus, trying to find the edge, the crack, the signal that this moment would unfold the way he expected, but Marcus did not give him that, did not offer the quick retreat or the sharp reply, only that same steady presence, rooted and deliberate, as the wind moved faintly down the street carrying the distant echo of a siren miles away, too far to matter, too faint to change anything here, and yet something in the air felt like it was shifting, not loudly, not suddenly, but slowly, like a current building beneath the surface, unseen but undeniable, and Marcus, standing between what was and what could be, felt it. Before anyone else did, the quiet weight of a moment that had not yet revealed its true direction. Ethan Cole had built his reputation on moments exactly like this, moments where the air turned thin and people folded without needing to be told, and he wore that reputation like a second skin, easy and practiced, his posture loose but controlled, as if the street itself belonged to him and everyone on it understood that without needing it explained. He took a slow step forward, not close enough to invade, just enough to test the space Marcus was holding, his boots pressing softly against damp pavement, the faint sound barely audible but deliberate, a signal more than a movement, and the others behind him shifted in quiet agreement, their presence tightening the edges of the moment like a frame closing in. To Ethan, this was simple, it always had been, the world sorted into clear lines of who stepped aside and who did not, and when someone did not, when someone stood still like Marcus was doing now, it was not seen as strength. It was seen as a mistake waiting to be corrected, and that belief sat behind his eyes as he studied Marcus again, searching for something he could use, a hesitation, a flicker, anything that would confirm the script he had already written in his head, but Marcus did not give him that, and that absence began to stretch, subtle at first, then noticeable, like a pause in music that lasts just a second too long, enough to make people shift uncomfortably without knowing why. A faint breeze moved down the block, catching a loose piece of paper near the curb and sending it skittering across the asphalt, the soft scraping sound filling the silence for a brief moment before disappearing again, and somewhere in the distance a door closed, the echo bouncing faintly between buildings, reminders that the world beyond this corner was still moving, still alive, even as everything here seemed suspended. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, not from anger, but from disruption, because this was not how it usually went, and he was not used to that. Not used to someone absorbing the pressure without reacting to it, not used to a presence that did not bend or flare but simply remained. He let out a short breath through his nose, a half laugh that did not quite carry humor, and tilted his head again, as if recalibrating, as if trying to decide whether Marcus was stubborn, unaware, or something else entirely. Behind Marcus, the boy shifted his weight, the faint scuff of his sneaker against concrete barely audible, but enough for Marcus to register it without turning. A quiet reminder of why he was still here, why he had not stepped away when he easily could have, and that awareness anchored him deeper into the moment, his shoulders settling, his stance becoming not rigid but rooted, like something that had chosen its place and would not be moved without reason. Ethan noticed that too, the subtle alignment, the way Marcus positioned himself not just for himself but for someone else, and for a brief second, something flickered across his expression, not understanding, but recognition of intent, and that made the space between them feel even tighter, because intent changed things. It shifted the meaning of stillness from passivity to purpose, and purpose was harder to dismiss. The streetlight above buzzed faintly, a soft electrical hum that grew louder in the silence, its glow stuttering for a split second before stabilizing again, casting long shadows that stretched and overlapped across the ground, blending outlines until it was harder to tell where one ended and another began. And in that dim, uneven light, Marcus Reed did not look like a man waiting for something to happen. He looked like a man who had already decided what would happen next, even if no one else could see it yet, and that quiet certainty, unspoken and steady, began to shift the balance of the moment in a way that no raised voice ever could. Marcus Reed could have stepped away at any moment, could have lowered his gaze, shifted his shoulders, and let the tension dissolve into the kind of quiet retreat that the street had seen 1,000 times before, but instead he did something smaller, something almost invisible. He took a single step to his left, just enough to place himself fully between the boy and the line of sight in front of him, not dramatic, not aggressive, just deliberate. And in that subtle movement there was a clarity that words could not match, because it answered a question no one had asked out loud. Ethan Cole saw it immediately, the repositioning, the intent behind it, and his expression changed, not sharply, but enough to register that something had shifted beyond his control, because this was no longer just a man standing his ground, this was a man choosing someone else over himself, and that made the moment harder to predict. The boy behind Marcus let out a shallow breath, barely audible, the kind that comes when fear pauses just long enough for hope to flicker in, and Marcus felt it without turning, that quiet presence at his back, the reminder that this was not about pride or ego or proving anything to anyone. It was about making sure that someone smaller, someone unseen, did not have to face the same weight alone. The streetlight above buzzed again, casting a brief tremor of light across Marcus's face, highlighting the calm that had not broken since the first word was spoken, and that calm was not empty, it was full of decision, full of memory, full of moments where he had learned that standing still could be louder than shouting. Ethan took another step, slower this time, his boots brushing against the thin film of water on the ground, the sound soft but deliberate, testing the boundary Marcus had drawn without saying a single word, and for a second, the distance between them felt like it carried more than just space. It carried expectation, the kind that demanded a reaction, demanded a response, demanded that Marcus play his part in a script that had already been written. But Marcus did not move, not forward, not back, his hands relaxed at his sides, his shoulders steady, his eyes level, and that refusal to follow the expected path created a tension that did not need volume to be felt. It stretched across the moment like a wire pulled tight, humming quietly beneath everything else. Somewhere down the block, a window shifted open and then closed again, the faint click echoing softly, as if someone had looked out, seen enough, and chosen not to be part of it, and that small detail settled into the scene like everything else, unnoticed but present, part of the world that watched but did not intervene. Ethan exhaled slowly, his patience thinning in a way that was not explosive but controlled, and he glanced briefly past Marcus, catching a glimpse of the boy near the fence, then back again, connecting the pieces, understanding the reason for the stance, and for a moment, something like calculation crossed his face, as if he were deciding whether this was worth continuing, whether this was still the simple situation he had assumed it to be. And Marcus saw that shift, that brief hesitation, and he did not press it, did not speak, did not escalate, because he understood something that Ethan did not. That power was not always about pushing forward, sometimes it was about holding a line so steady that the other side had to reconsider crossing it, and in that quiet, under the dim light and the distant hum of a city that kept moving without them, Marcus Reed stood not as a man waiting for something to happen, but as a man who had already chosen what he would not allow to happen, and that choice, simple and unspoken, began to reshape the moment in ways no one there could fully see yet. The silence did not break all at once, it tightened first, like the air had been pulled too thin to hold steady, and then it shifted, subtle but undeniable, as Ethan Cole's patience began to wear into something sharper, something less controlled, his eyes narrowing not out of confusion anymore but out of resistance, as if Marcus's refusal to respond had become its own kind of challenge. He took another step, closer this time, not rushing, not lunging, just closing the space. Inch by inch, testing whether that invisible line Marcus had drawn would hold under pressure, and for a moment, it felt like the entire street leaned in to watch, the faint hum of electricity overhead, the distant roll of a car passing 2 blocks away, even the soft rustle of wind catching a loose piece of plastic near the curb, all fading into the background as the focus narrowed to the space between 2 men standing on opposite sides of the same decision. Marcus felt it, the shift, the weight of expectation pressing forward, urging movement, urging reaction, urging him to either step back or push forward, anything but remain exactly where he was, and yet he did neither, his breathing steady, his posture unchanged, his presence quiet but firm, as if he understood that the moment was no longer about what was said or done, but about what was refused. Behind him, the boy's grip on his backpack loosened slightly, not because the fear was gone, but because something else had entered the Space, something steadier, something that did not demand attention but held it anyway, and that small shift, that almost imperceptible change, anchored Marcus even deeper into his stance. Ethan noticed it too, the way the dynamic was no longer entirely his, the way the stillness had begun to resist him, and that resistance showed in the tightening of his jaw, in the slight adjustment of his shoulders, in the way his voice, when it finally came, carried less certainty than before, even if it tried to hide it. "You think standing there changes anything?" he said, not loudly, not softly, just enough to fill the space, but the words did not land the way he expected. They did not break the moment open. They hung there, unanswered, like something waiting for confirmation that never came. Marcus did not respond, not because he had nothing to say, but because he understood that this was not a conversation, it was a test. And tests did not always require answers, sometimes they required endurance, sometimes they required holding a position long enough for the other side to question their own. A faint sound echoed down the street then, distant at first, almost easy to ignore, a low mechanical rhythm that blended into the background noise of the city. But Marcus heard it, recognized the pattern without turning his head, without shifting his gaze, the way someone recognizes a familiar signal after hearing it enough times to understand what it means without needing to confirm it. Ethan did not notice it yet, not fully, his focus still locked on Marcus, still trying to pull a reaction from a man who refused to give one. And that imbalance, that difference in awareness, created a tension that stretched just beneath the surface, invisible but growing. The streetlight flickered again, casting a brief shadow across Marcus's face, and for the first time, there was something else there, not fear, not anger, but a quiet certainty that had not been visible before, the kind that comes when a moment reaches its turning point, even if no one else has realized it yet. Marcus shifted his weight just slightly, not stepping forward, not stepping back, just grounding himself as the distant sound grew a fraction louder, still far, still subtle, but no longer ignorable. And in that quiet, under that unstable light, with the air holding steady around them, the balance of the moment began to tilt in a way that no one present had expected, not because of force, not because of volume, but because something unseen was already moving toward them. And Marcus Reed, standing exactly where he had chosen to stand, was the only one who knew it. The sound grew slowly, not loud enough to command attention, not sharp enough to break the moment, but steady, like something that had already decided it was coming and did not need permission to arrive. And Marcus Reed stood beneath the flickering light with that same quiet stillness, his breath measured, his gaze level, as if the tension around him had settled into something almost familiar. A drop of water slid from the edge of a nearby fire escape, falling 12 feet before it touched the pavement with a soft tap that echoed louder than it should have in the silence, and then another followed, and another, forming a slow rhythm that seemed to mark time in a space where everything else had paused. Ethan Cole shifted his stance again, the faint sound beneath his boots sharper now, his earlier certainty thinning into something less defined, because the moment had stretched too long without breaking, and moments like that had a way of turning, had a way of revealing something unexpected. Marcus lowered his eyes for just a fraction of a second, not in submission, but in thought, as if he were listening to something beyond the surface of the street, something that did not belong to the voices or the presence around him. And when he lifted them again, there was a calm there that felt deeper than before, anchored in something older than this night, older than this block. Behind him, the boy shifted again, his breathing uneven but quieter now, as if the fear had begun to loosen its grip just enough to let him stand without trembling. And that small change did not go unnoticed by Marcus, even without turning, even without looking, because he had learned to read the space around him the same way he read the subtle signs of a failing system, the slight changes that told you something important was happening before anyone else saw it. The distant sound rolled closer, still muted, still blending with the background, but now it carried a pattern, a rhythm that did not belong to chance, and Marcus recognized it fully now, not with surprise, not with urgency, but with a quiet acceptance. As if he had known from the beginning that this moment would not remain contained within the narrow lines of this street. Ethan's head tilted slightly, his attention catching on that same distant noise at last, his focus breaking just enough to glance past Marcus for a brief second, and in that glance, something shifted again, because uncertainty had entered the space, small but undeniable. The streetlight above flickered once more, then steadied, casting a soft glow across Marcus's face, illuminating the stillness that had not changed since the first word was spoken. The kind of stillness that did not resist, did not provoke, but endured, and in that endurance there was a strength that did not need to prove itself. Marcus exhaled slowly, the air leaving his lungs in a steady stream that fogged briefly in the cool night before, fading into nothing, and for a moment, everything seemed to align, the sound drawing closer, the tension holding steady, the silence deepening instead of breaking, as if the street itself was waiting, not for a reaction, not for a confrontation, but for something else entirely. He did not move, did not speak, did not change his stance, because the choice had already been made, long before this moment, long before this street, a choice to stand without becoming what the moment demanded, to remain without losing what mattered, and as the distant rhythm edged closer into something more defined, something no longer part of the background, Marcus Reed remained exactly where he was, grounded, present, and unshaken, while the balance of everything around him shifted quietly toward a turning point no one could stop anymore. The sound was no longer distant, no longer something that could be mistaken for background noise. It rolled into the street with a presence that shifted everything without a single word being spoken, low engines humming in controlled unison, tires pressing against wet pavement with a steady, deliberate rhythm that did not rush and did not hesitate, and Marcus Reed did not turn immediately, did not break his stance. Because he did not need to confirm what he already understood, Ethan Cole turned. First, his attention pulled away despite himself, his eyes narrowing as the first vehicle came into view at the end of the block, headlights cutting clean lines through the dim streetlight, illuminating the edges of the scene in sharp contrast, and behind it, more followed, not chaotic, not scattered, but precise, each one aligning with a discipline that did not belong to the streets Ethan controlled. The air changed then, not louder, not heavier, but clearer, as if something unspoken had entered and claimed the space without needing permission, and the figures stepping out moved with that same quiet certainty, boots meeting pavement with a soft, measured sound, no rush, no wasted motion, their presence filling the street not with noise but with order. Marcus finally shifted his gaze, just slightly, enough to acknowledge without reacting, his expression. Unchanged, the calm still there, but now it carried something else, something that connected the moment behind him with the one arriving in front of him. Ethan took a step back before he realized he had done it, the movement small but revealing, his earlier control slipping just enough to expose uncertainty, because this was no longer a situation he recognized, no longer something that followed his expectations, and the men around him felt it too, their posture adjusting, their silence different now, no longer confident but questioning. One figure moved forward from the line, not quickly, not dramatically, just with a quiet authority that drew attention without demanding it, and when he stopped a few feet away, his eyes did not go to Ethan, did not scan the group, they went directly to Marcus, steady, recognizing, and in that recognition, the entire moment shifted. Marcus met his gaze, not with surprise, not with relief, but with a calm acknowledgement that did not need explanation, and for a second, neither of them spoke, the silence between them heavier than anything that had come before, because it carried history, something deeper than the street, deeper than the moment. Ethan looked between them, confusion threading through his expression now, trying to understand why the focus had moved away from him, why the center of the moment was no longer where he had placed it, and that confusion grew as more figures stepped into position, not surrounding aggressively, not closing in, but establishing a presence that left no space for doubt. The boy behind Marcus leaned slightly to the side, just enough to see past him, his eyes wide not with fear now but with something else, something closer to awe, as the scene transformed into something he had not expected, something no one there had expected. The streetlight steadied above, casting a clear glow across faces that had changed without anyone speaking the words. And in that stillness, the man who had stepped forward spoke, his voice calm, measured, carrying without needing volume. "Marcus," he said, not as a question, not as a command, but as recognition, and Marcus nodded once, a small motion that confirmed everything without explaining anything, and in that quiet exchange, the balance of the entire moment shifted completely, leaving Ethan Cole standing in a space that no longer belonged to him, facing a reality he had not seen coming, while Marcus Reed remained exactly where he had been all along, calm, steady, and finally seen for who he truly was. No one spoke right away after the name was said, because it did not need repeating. It carried enough weight on its own, settling into the space like something final, something that closed one chapter and opened another without asking permission. The man standing across from Marcus held his gaze for a moment longer, then gave a slight nod, not formal, not ceremonial, but personal, the kind that came from shared history, from moments that had already proven everything words could try to explain. And when he turned his head just slightly, the others behind him adjusted without being told. their movement quiet and precise, creating a boundary that was not aggressive but unmistakable. Ethan Cole stood still, his earlier confidence now fractured into something uncertain, his eyes moving from Marcus to the men who had arrived, trying to piece together a situation that no longer followed the rules he understood, and for the first time, the silence around him felt different, not like control, not like dominance, but like absence, as if something had shifted out from under him without warning. Marcus remained where he was, his shoulders relaxed, his hands steady at his sides, not stepping forward, not stepping back, because there was no need to change anything now. The moment had already turned, and he had never been trying to win it, only to hold it long enough for the truth to arrive. The man who had spoken his name finally addressed the space, his voice calm, measured, carrying just enough to be heard without raising it. "You chose the wrong man to test tonight," he said, not looking at Ethan directly, but letting the words settle where they needed to, and there was no threat in his tone, no anger, just clarity, the kind that left no room for misunderstanding. Ethan swallowed once, the movement small but visible, his posture shifting slightly as if the ground beneath him had changed without him realizing it, and he glanced again at Marcus, searching for something that would explain the disconnect between what he had assumed and what was now in front of him. But Marcus did not offer anything, did not meet that search with explanation or pride, only with the same steady presence that had been there from the beginning. Behind Marcus, the boy took a cautious step to the side, his eyes moving between the figures now, filling the street, his fear replaced by a quiet curiosity, the kind that comes when something unexpected replaces something threatening. And for a moment, he looked at Marcus not as someone standing in front of him, but as someone who had changed what was about to happen without ever raising his voice. The man in front of Marcus spoke again, softer this time, more personal. "You still do this," he said, almost as if he already knew the answer, and Marcus allowed the smallest hint of a smile to touch his expression, not for the others, not for the moment, but for what the question meant. "Someone has to," he replied, his voice low, steady, carrying no edge, only truth. That answer lingered in the air longer than anything else had, because it reframed everything, not as a confrontation, not as a display of power, but as a choice, a simple one that Marcus had made long before this street, long before this night. And as the silence settled again, deeper now, more complete, Ethan Cole lowered his gaze just slightly, not in defeat, not in fear, but in something closer to realization, as if he had finally understood that the man he had misjudged was never part of the game he thought he was playing. And in that quiet shift, without any further words, the moment resolved itself, not through force, not through noise, but through the undeniable presence of truth that had been there all along. The street did not erupt, it exhaled, slowly, like a held breath finally released after stretching too far, and the tension that had once pressed against every inch of space softened into something quieter, something that did not need to prove anything anymore. Marcus Reed stood for a moment longer, not because he had to, but because he understood that endings, like beginnings, deserved a pause, a space where everything could settle into what it had become. And under the steady glow of the streetlight, the outlines of the moment began to fade into something almost ordinary. The man who had called his name stepped back first, a subtle gesture that signaled the shift more clearly than any command, and the others followed without hesitation, their presence easing, not disappearing, but no longer defining the space the way it had only minutes before. Their vehicles idling softly down the block, engines no longer announcing arrival but preparing for departure. Ethan Cole did not move right away, his gaze lingering on Marcus with a different weight now, not the sharp edge of judgment that had been there before, but something quieter, something unsettled, as if he were trying to reconcile two versions of the same man and finding that they did not fit together the way he had expected. Marcus met that gaze for a brief second, not to challenge it, not to confirm anything, but simply to acknowledge it, and then he looked away, because there was nothing left to prove, nothing left to explain. Behind him, the boy took a few careful steps forward, closing the distance that had once felt impossible, his grip on his backpack loosening completely now, his shoulders lowering as if a weight had lifted that he did not know how to name. And when he looked up at Marcus, there was a quiet question there, not spoken, but clear enough to be understood, and Marcus answered it the only way he knew how, with a small nod, steady and reassuring, the kind that did not promise the world, but promised enough. The wind moved gently through the street, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and distant city noise, blending everything back into the rhythm of a night that would continue long after this moment was gone. And one by one, the figures who had arrived began to step away, their movements just as controlled in leaving as they had been in arriving, until the street no longer felt occupied, only observed by the quiet traces they left behind. Ethan turned last, his steps slower, more measured than before, as if each one carried a thought he could not quite finish, and when he finally walked away, he did not look back, not out of pride, not out of fear, but because something in him had already shifted forward, away from what had been and toward something he had not yet understood. Marcus watched none of it for long, because his part in the moment had never been about staying, and as the last engine sound faded into the distance, he adjusted his jacket slightly. The familiar weight of it settling against his shoulders, grounding him back into the simple reality